Is Joe Goldberg a cold, calculating psychopath, or a deeply wounded narcissist who's just desperate for love? The real answer is probably more disturbing than you think. For years, we've watched Joe, the charming, well-read, and lethally obsessive star of You, build cages, both real and metaphorical, for the women he says he adores. He stalks, he manipulates, and he kills, all while his internal monologue casts him as the romantic hero in his own twisted story. But what's the actual clinical truth behind that charming mask? His behavior is a complex mess of psychological red flags, and it leaves fans debating his true diagnosis all the time. So today, we're putting Joe on the proverbial couch. We'll explore the evidence for both antisocial personality disorder, what most of us call psychopathy, and narcissistic personality disorder, tracing his issues from their traumatic roots all the way to his evolution across the seasons. Just a quick heads up, we are analyzing a fictional character here. This is just a way to understand some complex psychological ideas through a really compelling story, not to diagnose an actual person. All right, let's get into the mind of Joe Goldberg. To understand the man, you have to start with the boy. Joe's issues weren't born in a vacuum, they were forged in a deeply traumatic childhood. From his earliest memories, Joe's life was a cycle of abuse, neglect, and abandonment. His father was violent, and his mother, Sandy, was a whirlwind of inconsistency, leaving him alone for days, but also pulling him into terrifying adult messes. This chaos created what psychologists call a disorganized attachment style, a confusing push-pull dynamic where the person who's supposed to give you love is also the source of your fear. For Joe, love and pain got tangled up from the very beginning. This toxic foundation was set in stone when a young Joe, trying to protect his mother, killed his abusive father. But instead of being comforted, he was abandoned by his mom and thrown into a group home, which only offered him more mistreatment. This was the ultimate betrayal, a wound that festered into a lifelong terror of being abandoned. Later, he was taken in by the bookstore owner, Mr. Mooney. But Mooney's idea of care was just another flavor of abuse. As punishment, he'd lock Joe in that now infamous glass cage. This taught Joe to see the very tools he'd later use on his victims, isolation, control, and violence, as twisted expressions of care. Mooney even approved of violence, telling Joe that some people deserve what they get, which completely warped his moral compass. This relentless trauma created the perfect storm for a severe personality disorder, teaching him that control is love, punishment is discipline, and abandonment is always just around the corner. This brings us to our first stop, Narcissistic Personality Disorder, or NPD. NPD is defined by a pattern of grandiosity, a bottomless need for admiration, and a total lack of empathy. And at his core, Joe Goldberg believes he's special. He's not just some guy falling in love. He's a savior, the good guy on a mission to rescue deeply flawed women from their own messy lives. That's his grandiose story. His relationships follow a terrifyingly predictable script, known as the narcissistic abuse cycle: idealize, devalue, and discard. First up is idealization, or what's better known as love bombing. When Joe hones in on a new target, whether it's Beck or Love Quinn, he doesn't see them. He sees a fantasy, a blank canvas for his own romantic projections. He uses all the information he gets from stalking to perfectly mold himself into their dream partner, making it seem like they've met their soulmate by pure chance. But the second the real person starts to clash with his perfect fantasy, the devaluation phase kicks in. Suddenly, their friends are threats, their choices are flaws, and their independence is a betrayal. This is when Joe feels entitled to fix things, usually by isolating them from anyone he sees as a bad influence. His fear of abandonment goes into overdrive, and his thinking becomes completely black and white. You're either perfect and with him, or you're an obstacle that needs to be removed. And for Joe, the final discard is usually fatal. He doesn't just break up with them, he erases them, which lets him rewrite history and keep seeing himself as the tragic hero. It's this calculated, cyclical pattern that is so unbelievably chilling, and we see it play out with nearly every single one of his obsessions. If you're finding this breakdown interesting and want more deep dives into the psychology of your favorite characters, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us keep making this content for you. But narcissism is only half the picture. To really get Joe's capacity for violence, we have to look at Antisocial Personality Disorder, or ASPD. Psychopath might be the casual term, but it lines up pretty well with the clinical traits of ASPD, especially the Factor 1 traits: superficial charm, a grandiose sense of self, pathological lying, and a stunning lack of remorse or empathy. This is where you see the cold predator hiding under the lovesick poet act. Joe is a master of superficial charm. It's his greatest weapon. It's how he reels people in, convincing them he's sincere while he's secretly invading every corner of their lives. But his actions are what scream ASPD. He stalks, kidnaps, and murders with a methodical coldness that's hard to stomach. Now, he isn't completely without feeling. He can show flashes of empathy, like when he was devastated by his landlady's death or chose to spare 40. This complicates a pure psychopathy diagnosis, but his ability to rationalize his other actions is off the charts. To deal with the awful things he does, Joe relies on cognitive dissonance. He knows killing is wrong, but he makes it okay by turning his victims into villains. Benji is an entitled pest, Peach is a manipulative socialite, and Henderson is a predator. In his head, he's not a murderer, he's a garbage man cleaning up the world to protect the woman he loves. This isn't a man fighting his dark side, it's a man who has made peace with it. Psychologists call this egosyntonic. His inner monster isn't something he fights, it's a necessary, even justified part of who he is. So, what's the final verdict? Is Joe a psychopath or a narcissist? The clinical truth is, he doesn't fit neatly into one box. Joe Goldberg is a chilling hybrid, a perfect storm of pathology that makes him so uniquely dangerous. The best label for this condition is malignant narcissism. He's got the core drivers of a narcissist: that desperate need for validation, the hero story he tells himself, and a crippling fear of abandonment that fuels his every obsession. But he uses the tools of a psychopath to get what he wants: remorseless violence, cold-blooded manipulation, and a complete disregard for anyone else's right to live. A huge piece of the puzzle is what Joe calls love. Clinically, his behavior isn't really love at all. It's a delusional obsession. He doesn't fall in love with Beck, or love, or Kate. He falls in love with the idea of them, a fantasy he built inside his own head. His stalking isn't the first step to a relationship. In his mind, the stalking is the relationship. Knowing every detail and controlling every variable is his twisted form of intimacy. Across the seasons, we watch his methods get more refined and his delusions get more entrenched, but the core pathology is always there. The trauma of his childhood helps explain how the monster was made, but it doesn't excuse what the monster does. These behaviors aren't a phase. They are a rigid, unshakable part of his personality. The clearest picture we get of Joe is a malignant narcissist with major psychopathic traits, all built on a foundation of severe childhood trauma and a disorganized attachment style. His motivation is narcissistic, to be the hero, but his methods are purely psychopathic. He's driven by a deep emptiness that he desperately tries to fill with an obsessive, idealized love, and he is more than willing to eliminate anyone who threatens to shatter that illusion. As a character, Joe is a powerful, fictional, cautionary tale. He forces us to look past a charming surface and question where romantic devotion ends and dangerous obsession begins. He was written to explore the darkest parts of the human mind, and in doing so, he makes us question our own ideas of love, trauma, and the monsters that can hide in plain sight. So, I'll turn it over to you. After hearing all the evidence, what do you think? Is Joe purely a product of his trauma, a victim who became a monster, or was that darkness always in him, just waiting for a chance to grow? Let me know your diagnosis in the comments below.